be and is not for there to be and is. So it just is. That's its quality. That's its nature. Its existence itself. There is no why to it. There is only why within it.
Perfectly logical.
Yes.
Are the God archetypes built into a place and people the way information from the zodiac and constellations are? Or is it primarily a cultural thing?
Well, it's both, in the sense that the very idea of archetypes is built into the collective consciousness, the fabric of your collective consciousness, in order to give you the ability to experience symbols and signs and reflections from different symbols in your reality, different symbols in physical reality that can reflect to you different portions of your consciousness, help you get in touch with the rules of the game that you set up for yourselves to have an earth game experience. So it's built in, but it's also reflected because it's built in by any permission slip symbol you choose to use to connect you to the archetypal vibrational level of energy.
And since many gods are interdimensional beings, do any of them take human form and physically interact on occasion with humans, such as in the tales of Zeus? Does Zeus still visit Earth to do activities, even though he's fallen out of popularity as a symbol? And does Zeus have a message for the audience today?
The Zeus archetype still functions in your collective consciousness, of course, because once created in that way, nothing ever really leaves it. But it's perceived very differently because you have modernized yourselves to not necessarily represent it in the form of an idea called a god. But to answer the first question, yes, there are extra dimensional beings and spirit beings who can take physical form and can represent themselves in a way that you're familiar enough with that you're willing to accept them in your reality. But in a sense, it's a disguise, it's a translation of who they really are or what they really are that makes itself known to you that way so that a connection can be made that you would recognize. So the idea of going back to Zeus is that the fundamental principle that Zeus represents in your society in this modern day and age is the idea of what you call the lightning strike of inspiration. You still even use the idea, oh, lightning has struck, when you become inspired by something. And that is the fundamental principle of the archetype of Zeus. It is the lightning strike of inspiration to your greater selves and can function as a connection to your higher minds, to the heavens, so to speak.
Yeah. Just on that topic of Greek gods and everything, the way that they were depicted in our history, are they actually just archetypes or were they ETs that were being personalized?
Well, again, both. Many cultures on your planet got to a point where they sort of forgot about the literal physical extraterrestrials that these concepts might have represented and simply rendered them down into the archetypal images that everyone could relate to on an energetic level or a consciousness level or a mental level. Not all of them are representative of literal individual extraterrestrials, but many of them are. It's just that down through time, you have forgotten that connection.
Okay. And are archetypes sentient beings?
They are autonomous unto themselves because, again, every depiction of consciousness in any form is autonomous unto itself as well as being part of the whole.
So is each one of us a unique archetype of God?
You are. Exactly so. That's the final equation to the understanding of archetypes, is that every single one of you and every single being in existence is an archetype of all that is.
Wow. Has your civilization made contact with angels or any other beings of that nature?
We communicate with higher frequency beings all the time. Spirits, what you call angels, which are not necessarily exactly what you think. But yes, vibrationally, we communicate and connect to many different non-physical entities of various vibrational frequencies. It doesn't mean we're connecting to them all. We connect to the ones that are relevant for us.
And how do you express your emotions? Are
Very well,
You
thank you.
are you in control of your emotions?
Well, yes, of course. We simply express them as we naturally do. But the idea is that we also choose as a collective to express the idea of the positive emotions without necessarily invalidating what you would call the negative ones, even though fundamentally no emotion per se is really negative experientially, because it can always be used in a transformational way. But we understand what you mean by that. Nevertheless, we have no reason to express what you typically refer to as the negative emotions, because we understand creation clearly enough that it simply doesn't make sense for us to do that. But if you're asking, are we happy? Do we have a lot of fun? Do we experience love and joy? Absolutely. Do we laugh? Yes.
Have you ever experienced anger?
No.
Even as an aligning thing. So you're beyond needing to align. You're just always aligned. So you wouldn't express that emotion.
Correct. Now, the only way we can relate to it again is by having the incarnations in physical reality that express things that way to train us to understand your culture. So the idea of the emotions that the channel may have experienced, we can connect to them and we can examine and observe and even experience them to some degree. But the thing of it is even though we experience them, we know they're not ours. We know that it's a simulation for us. So we can get what we need out of experiencing the simulation by connecting to the vibrations of physical humans on your planet. But again, we understand it more as an observational experience. And even though we can, to some degree, feel it, we don't feel it in the same way you do, because it doesn't come with the judgmental agenda that you also attach to many of what you call your negative emotions.
So is that how you understood about anger, that you can experience it for, what did you say, about 15 seconds, and beyond that, in that context, it's aligning. Beyond that, it's judgment.
Yes. It's sort of similar to the idea of, let's say you're standing on dry land and you want to know what the experience of being dunked in water is. So someone dunks you in the water, but then puts you right back on dry land. And then you can say, all right, now I understand generally what that experience is about. Now I can explore all the aspects of it, but I don't necessarily experience it as a continuous thing in my culture. It's simply an experimental experience that's temporary, that I can use to the advantage of my understanding and in helping others in their understanding, as we do with all of you.
How would you compare yourselves to like the ETs that were in that movie AI?
They were not ETs, they were advanced robots.
Ah,
That's why we described them before when we were talking about machine civilizations.
I see.
They are what the
And
robots on that planet, on your planet, in that film had become, had evolved to after 2,000 years.
so in terms of your connection with artificial intelligence, can you share anything about that with us?
Well, if I'm still using the same analogy, we are in some ways similar to what was depicted in that movie. In some ways not, of course, but in some ways energetically very similar to what was depicted there.
Interesting. And you're fourth transitioning fifth, right?
Yes,
Density. Right. So that
quasi-physical.
means you're quasi-physical. Because I
Yes.
think some people have the impression that you're not physical.
Oh, yes.
And like, when you say you're quasi-physical, like if we saw you, would you look solid to us?
We can present ourselves as solid, absolutely. But in our natural state, we may not appear that way completely, because we exhibit the traits of spirit and the traits of physical reality. And as I said, we're not just a bunch of physical beings walking around on the surface of a planet. We are actually stepping through multitudes of dimensionality in our daily lives. So we're not always focused in the way that you're focused in physical reality, but we preserve some of that experience, mostly for the purpose, especially from first contact specialists, of interacting with other civilizations who wouldn't necessarily understand us in our natural state.
Um, There's a question here about Andromeda. Are
Yes.
you open to talking about Andromeda?
To an extent.
Okay, so you mentioned that the ratio of folks we connect with in Andromeda Galaxy is about a small percentage of, it was 1% of the Andromeda Galaxy, basically.
1% of the civilizations in Andromeda is mostly what you're interacting with, yes.
Okay. And this individual has been channeling spirit guidance from the Andromeda Galaxy, and they tried to find out more information about it, but they weren't really able to find out much. Something about the light beings inhabiting that civilization and archetypes of God, but
Yes.
they didn't seem to have that much clarity.
All right. Well, the idea of the beings that you are interacting with in Andromeda mostly are light beings, especially because there are very, very few, very rare occurrences of any physiological civilizations actually coming from that galaxy to your galaxy at this particular time. There have been a few, but it's rare. So most of the consciousness that you're interacting with in Andromeda are interdimensional beings of light. Yes.
And are all of the beings of your civilization blessed with what they're calling an activated third eye? The idea that you can use it to communicate with beings on Earth and also use it for remote viewing of other advanced civilizations.
Yes.
Okay.
To be succinct.
Okay. Let's see.
This was our great awakening. This was the Shekinah experience of opening up and our awareness connecting to everyone else in our civilization in the span of 3 days. It's called the Great Awakening, the Shekinah experience.
Will something like that happen on our planet, or that's not really in the cards for us?
It can. It doesn't have to happen that way, but it can. Or at least a similar version of it that's relevant for you can certainly occur.
Maybe on an individual basis.
Maybe more so, but again, eventually, as you shift yourself to versions of Earth that are more reflective of what you really prefer and are more representative of who you truly are, you may suddenly find yourself interacting with every single being that has navigated themselves to a similar version in that way. You can have your awakening in that way, but you might just suddenly realize that it's been happening rather than it being a particular demarcation.
And does mass consciousness create archetypes, or do archetypes exist independently of mass consciousness and we're simply tuning into their frequency?
Since all that is all that is, archetypes exist, but mass consciousness decides how to use the archetypal energy in the way that is relevant for the cultures that will appear in those civilizations.
And if archetypal characters spring from the mass consciousness, well, maybe they don't spring from it, but does there exist archetypal representations of such characters as Paul Bunyan, Uncle Sam, Santa Claus, Mickey Mouse, Superman, and other well-known fictional characters?
Yes, in fact, the idea of fictional characters is that they usually are representations of archetypes.
Okay. And is there, so playing with those archetypes that children are attracted to, or even adults are attracted to, how can that help us to interact with those beings?
Well, by creating stories, by using those archetypes, you can understand your connection to them more fully, more clearly, as representations of your own internal energies, as well as your own choices in life and challenges in life and how to transform them. So archetypes, when used in a fictional story sense, can be very transformative, of course. That's why stories are so strong, because they represent certain ideas, certain experiences that aid and assist you in elevating yourselves and evolving yourselves in a variety of ways. They help you see the light.
So like Mickey Mouse is so popular all over the world. Is there anything specific you can share with us about why that particular archetype is so?
Well, it is an archetype, not the archetype. There are many different versions of that idea, but it is an archetype of innocence and play.
Oh, I see.
of imagination in a
And
childlike way.
and it has the attributes like of the large eyes, the cuteness. That's
Yes.
all kind of
That's what I
baby
said, in a childlike way.
like way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it also represents the idea that big things can come in small packages.
Yeah, because it is pretty interesting the way so many different cultures have embraced Mickey Mouse.
Yes, because again, it is an archetype of imagination expanding beyond what would appear to be its ability.
Right. I see. Okay, this question this person is asking is, am I dead? You've talked about people who don't know that they're dead, and even though they've transitioned, and they still think they're alive. And could anyone attending this event actually be one of the people who's dead, but they think they're still alive?
Not likely. The
Okay.
idea, however, is when we say you are dead, means that most of you or some of you is still in spirit and always has been. And that the idea of physical reality is just a projection from spirit. It's a dream you're having in spirit that you're not in spirit. So on that level, everyone is dead, but that's how everyone lives. Everyone is alive. So the idea is that the way you apportion your consciousness allows you to experience yourself as being physically alive, even while you are dead, meaning you are alive in spirit. But it is very rare that an actual person who is physically dead will look like a living person in a crowd. It's not impossible, and we can sense that it has happened because there have been many reports of people interacting with what they thought were living people who weren't. So it just depends upon the purpose and the reason for the projection of a spirit consciousness to make itself appear as if it is a living physical person. So it's not impossible. It's just relatively rare and relatively unlikely that a spirit would need to physicalize itself in order to be participating in these events, because there are many spirits that do participate in these events. They just don't have to present themselves as an actual physical being to do so. Though it depends upon, let's just say, their level of mischief.
Um,
I say that with a wink.
that's what I was thinking about, that the higher consciousness extraterrestrials have a wonderful sense of humor, because that
Yes,
seems to come with intelligence
yes,
and can be mischievous, right?
yes.
Not like you're not mischievous, though, are
Oh,
you?
no, not at all.
Okay, let's see. Do others need our help? Do others actually need help with teaching, healing, helping, serving, etc.? We're always tuning into that. And since each person has an infinite version of themselves, aren't we just kind of creating someone who needs help if we think it's our job to be a healer or?
No, no. You may be creating your version of them, but that doesn't mean that there isn't an actual individual that is requiring of assistance. That's the whole idea anyway, to be of service to each other, to reflect to each other who you are and to help with what you need. Again, it doesn't mean that people have to accept the help, but that's the purpose of it, is to reflect to each other what you really need to create scenarios and challenges that will help you learn who you are in different situations. So in that context, if you want to put it this way, everyone needs help. And at the same time, I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not saying that everyone is helpless. The idea is that everyone needs help as a device in order to learn more about themselves and in order to know that they're connected to other beings, truly, that everyone is a representation of all that is, looking at all the reflections of itself and experiencing that interconnectedness that allows you to know that you are here for each other.
So is suffering necessary for growth?
Challenges are necessary for growth. It doesn't have to mean that you have to suffer, But this is one of the challenges that you're facing, is to learn that you don't have to suffer to have a challenge that will help you grow. We have challenges. We don't suffer.
What kind of challenges do you have?
Well, even the idea of making first contact with a civilization like yours is a wondrous challenge, because you're very different than us. We have learned many things about the way you express yourself. This is a great challenge to know exactly in what way we can be of assistance, in what way to approach you that doesn't intervene or interfere with your process of learning about yourselves. That's a challenge for a first contact specialist, especially when we connect with many different civilizations, all of which are so very different from one another. It's a challenge in that sense to know how to relate to so many different civilizations. It's part of our challenge as a first contact specialist.
It seems like here on Earth, a lot of misinterpretation of information. So that's probably one of the challenges you deal with us, yes?
Yes, absolutely. But we don't suffer because of it.
Because you have a different attitude about our power, so
Yes.
that it's not necessary for you to make that choice.
Let me put it to you this way. If we or you are watching two people play a game of chess, and you say one is winning and one is losing, well, we can observe this, but do we feel that the person that is losing is suffering? Or do we suffer because we recognize that someone may not be winning? No, it's a game of chess. That's what happens. One person may out-strategize another. One person may not understand the rules as clearly as another. One person may simply not be as experienced as another. But all of that goes into the factoring of learning to play the game better. So it's not about suffering. It's about learning. It's about an opportunity to play differently next time. There's no suffering involved in that, if you look at it that way.
Will the version of Earth that you interact with have a reduced level of suffering, or it will have all of the things that we're still currently aware of in our...
Ultimately, in the years to come, the decades to come, you will not experience the idea on that version of Earth of suffering. You will be similar to us, not identical, but similar. But it's up to you as to exactly how long it takes you to navigate to that version or versions, because again, you always keep navigating, you always keep changing. But you can get to a point where you don't have to experience suffering on the versions that you're navigating through. As we have often said, even though you may be at a point sometime where you don't necessarily need to let go of negative beliefs or fear-based beliefs anymore, you will still continue to streamline yourselves by simply letting go of what is no longer relevant. Doesn't mean that that thing that's no longer relevant had to have been negative. It's simply no longer relevant. Therefore, even though you may arrive eventually at a place where you don't experience suffering anymore, you will still have things to learn and things to let go of as you learn more and more about who and what you are as an extension of all that is. So yes, you can get there. But again, not everyone will necessarily choose to go in that direction.
So if a human does encounter another being suffering, and it seems to generate an emotional reaction from us,
yes,
to see something suffering,
then help them.
Right. So, but how would you, when you see a being suffering?
Yes,
versus...
like many of you.
And then
what do we do? What do we do?
Well, you
we
take
share
action.
The information. We take the action of sharing the information with you that can help you learn to stop suffering. But we also let you decide whether or not to apply that in your lives, because what you do with it is none of our business. So we make the opportunity available to you through our actions of communication, but that's all we can do, and that's all anyone can do. But you can share ideas that are different.
But you still don't have like the visceral reaction that we do, right?
No, because we see your greater selves. We know how powerful you are. We know that you are challenging yourselves in a variety of ways. We know that you're indestructible spirits and can't ever really die or annihilate yourselves. So we understand that you chose many of these challenges to learn who you are in all these different ways. We're here to help you learn that you can do it slightly differently so you don't have to suffer in that knowledge, in that exploration. But that's about it. Because the rest is up to you.
So, like, we notice that people who experience the horrors of war and things like that, they're quite traumatized and they have post-traumatic stress disorder and all of that. So I'm not sure I understand exactly how.
Let me give it to you this way. Again, it depends on how you use everything. Like we have said, it's not about what happens. It's about what you do with what happens that makes the difference. So even what you call PTSD can be a vibration that creates a pressure that forces a soul to really explore its options in another direction. It can be the driving force that makes a person look for another way, another path. It depends on how you use it. So if a person has put themselves in a position, in an experience, in a situation, in a circumstance where they create for the physical form a PTSD experience, they had a reason for doing so. And if they can allow themselves to remember that they can use that to their advantage, they may have done that, chosen that to accelerate their ability to move forward much more quickly than they otherwise would have, then that's a way to look at the idea of having chosen that situation to begin with. Because again, to the soul, it's just another way of knowing yourself.
Right.
Nothing is judged.
It's really about being able to expand to a higher level of yourself so that you don't have that effect, basically.
Yes. So that you understand how things work enough so that you know you can apply different definitions and different meanings to every experience so that you can take responsibility for having chosen the kind of experience you attracted to yourself or that you attracted yourself to in order to learn from it in a more powerful way. Because those things that you call negative, that you call horrific, do have the tendency to wake you up. So wake up.
And like in the past, humans would really get into a lot of blood sports, and huge crowds like to watch people being hung and, all the things that we've seen humans get excited about.
Yes.
And now we have most of that like on television.
Yes.
And so can you help us understand a little bit about what the function of that is or how that fits in?
Well, I think you already know, and many people on your planet understand these things can be cathartic. To put it in the simplest possible terms, you can work through some of that negative energy by watching a fictional character go through it without you having to experience it yourself. So if I really want to put it in the simplest possible phrase, it would be, well, thank goodness that's not me. But it can still allow you to feel the emotional responses and reactions that help you process those things within yourself, sometimes without even knowing you're doing so. So it can be cathartic if used that way. It can also be a representation of someone who has chosen to feel stuck in negative energy. But again, it comes down to how do you use the experience?
So along those lines, like when children watch violence, they tend, at least studies show that they start acting it out. And
yes, because they are taught that that's the way civilization exists and that that's inevitable for them. But you see, it has to go hand in hand with teaching them how things work. It's not just about letting them be exposed to the idea of the negativity without also exposing them to the idea that they have power to choose how to deal with it. So when a civilization is only left with one side of the equation, then yes, of course, they'll act that out because they're being taught this is the way our civilization is and this is what I'm supposed to do because that's what they taught me. You have to have the other side taught as well. You're out of balance. As you say, koyana.
Okay. I guess the last question then, as we're running out of time, is if you could share anything with us about the lunar eclipse that happened 2 nights ago, and how that impacts our planet or the people on our planet, in a positive way.
Remember, these things do not impact, they reflect things going on in your consciousness already. So again, it's an opportunity to go into the dark of night, into the shadow side. Find those fear-based beliefs and work with them. Find the feminine side and let it free. Balance. It's an opportunity to close your eyes and dream of the way you prefer to be. And in connection with the idea of lunar cycles, we will also answer another question you haven't asked. Where did the 52 card system come from in your playing cards? 52, the number of weeks in your year. 13 cards in each of the 4 suits, the lunar cycle of months in a year, and the 4 suits, the 4 seasons. So you're tapping as a permission slip into the cycles of nature by playing cards, whether you know it or not. We thank you for the interaction with these questions and answers. Our unconditional love to you all. And now, allow yourself to be prepared for the next phase of the transmission.
But
Yes.
I don't. So,
well, again, the idea is paramount to the concept of incorporating and balancing the female energy in your societies, of allowing you to understand the power of the feminine energy and to also incorporate the feminine energy in the masculine energy in a way that allows the power of the masculine energy to not be expressed in a negative way. So again, it's important for the balancing of all energies, male and female, just as it is important for the positive male energy to be balanced with the feminine energy, so that the female representation can express itself assertively, while the male energy incorporating the feminine energy also can balance itself, not into aggression, but again, into a statement of assertion, so that it becomes balanced in the center, in the neutral place, as a declaration of who you are, fully, as an expression of all that is. So the introduction of any representation of the feminine archetype into your society at this time would be primarily for the purpose of acting as a balancing mechanism to blend and balance the male and female energies. This is why the idea of the Magdalene was the equal opposite, so to speak, of the individual understood as Jesus Christ, and why Magdalene was his primary disciple, and more than that. So together, the two of them are really more representative of the idea of what has, shall we say, been misunderstood as the information shared by Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It should have come as a duality. It should have come as a new form of Trinity. But again, because of the fear-based beliefs in the male energy at the time in that culture, the female part was not accepted due to the insecurities of the masculine disciples.
okay. And are there machine-like civilizations such as the ones depicted in films like the Transformers? What sorts of gods do machine-based life forms idolize, if any? And are any of these civilizations curious about humans?
Although they don't look like your science fiction representations, there are machine-like civilizations. We have not encountered that many, but we have encountered a few. Many of them are very different from one another. We have not encountered any that, in your definition, idolize anything, for they operate on pure intelligence and understand that they are a part of creation and play a very different role archetypally for many other civilizations that are not necessarily machine-based. Now, again, do understand, of course, that the physical form of even your bodies, even though what you would call organic, are still machine-like. And therefore, the idea of the machine civilizations are not necessarily made out of what you would consider to be nuts and bolts, so to speak, but are formed from different kinds of materials, different kinds of alloys, different kinds of mixing and matching of the understanding of advanced forms of chemistry and polymers and materials you know nothing about yet to represent the physical forms that they take. You would still perhaps perceive them as machine-like, but perhaps, and again, not identical, but a closer representation of something that would be considered machine-like and yet nothing like your representation of the Transformers would be the representation depicted in your science fiction film AI at the end.
Yes.
A very advanced sort of robotic machine-like form, but also representation of a kind of different form of organic or organism. You may not even recognize it as machine-like. Now, some function on a level that you might say is quasi-machine-like, more of an energetic structure, more of a structure of light, but still not organic in the way you understand it, and therefore might qualify as a machine-like civilization since it is functioning off of organic patterns of solidified light.
Wow. Did the Greys from the parallel Earth ever meet any of their god archetypes in person once they collectively started to raise their vibration? And how did that happen with beings that have little capacity for emotion, to feel emotion?
You can perceive archetypes without necessarily reacting emotionally. Now, do remember that the Greys are mutated humans from a parallel version of Earth. So certainly in their own culture and in their own history, they understood the idea of archetypal energy. But by allowing themselves to suppress or turn off the idea of the emotional component of their society in order to function more efficiently in the creation of the hybridization agenda that they knew they required to save their civilization, they did encounter a new and different kind of archetypal energy, which is what you're experiencing now in your culture as the archetype of the extraterrestrial, the archetype of the other, the archetype of that which is different than you on a grand scale, on an expansive scale. So they did encounter that energy when they became a collective hive mentality. But again, they didn't need to have an emotional reaction to it. They simply recognized it as a pattern that they had now chosen to represent physiologically in their society. In other words, they physicalized the archetype of the other.
I see. In Sedona in September 2015, an unknown entity interrupted you with the following message. You are being joined by a new consciousness that will be the first seed of the sixth hybrid race that will ultimately lead to the seventh. Your comment about this announcement was that what you experienced was the beginning of a new archetypal energy coming into our system that has never been here before. The archetype of the extraterrestrial itself. Can you explain that any further and what this is all about, being joined by this energy?
Well, in some sense, I just did explain it. The idea is that you open up your consciousness to the idea that you are not alone, thus allowing you to start tapping into the vibrations of the archetype of the extraterrestrials that will eventually be experienced by you through open contact. So you have allowed yourself to arrange a portion of your collective consciousness in a fashion that is now capable of being communicated with that specifically represents the idea of contact with those that are other than you, with extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional beings. It is something that has now taken its place among the archetypal levels of your collective consciousness and provides a conduit through which we can come to communicate with you more clearly, more openly. So we are taking advantage of the fact that you have finally allowed yourself to create a conduit that is specifically representative of communication with all of us and allows you to be able to start experiencing your connections to the cosmos in a different way as part of a galactic family.
It's exciting.
Yes.
This question is, why does God and consciousness exist at all? Is there any kind of satisfying explanation for the miracle of all of this? I know it's outside of time and space, so it doesn't make sense to ask where it came from or how it started, but really, how can all this be possible? Did something create God? Who created it? And so on. Is it the turtles all the way down, as they say?
Yes, it is the turtles all the way down, all the way up, all the way sideways, all the way in every single direction. Even the question why is similar enough to the idea of, well, when or how or where? Is there a beginning? Is there an ending to God? No, it just is. So even asking why makes no sense, because the question why exists within all that is. It is not a question that all that is subject to. It just is. It is because everything else is not. That's the only answer we can give you. The idea of the Anunnaki attempting to correct what the original group of Anunnaki caused by the creation of Homo sapiens on your planet, and attempted to guide and preserve certain genetic lines that would allow for the eventual evolution of the Earth into the sixth hybrid race. Some were not Anunnaki. We have been asked this question before, and we are not allowed to discuss that race. The idea of the light is simply the light from a craft, the energy from a craft landing on the mountain that interacted with Moses. The idea of the burning bush, again, a holographic projection of energy that was interpreted as fire. Similar in many ways to what people on your planet have been experiencing today as orbs of energy, orbs of light. So interpreted in an old-fashioned way, because that was all that was understood. Energy at the time was not understood in the way you understand it now scientifically. Therefore, it was perceived as a fire, when all it was basically an orb of glowing energy to represent a communication modality, a probe that would allow for communication to occur between the extraterrestrials and the individual experiencing the idea of the burning of the orb. It used the idea of a bush kind of similarly to the idea of anchoring it to a spot, like an antenna.
So you've mentioned before that if we were to time travel back in time, because our frequency is much higher now, that we would glow if we encountered the historical beings.
You would appear to them to glow, yes.
Yeah. So did Jesus appear to glow also?
From time to time, yes. This is what is usually referred to as the transfiguration in your religious doctrines. The idea that he was perceived as being surrounded by a glowing aura.
And this person is saying, I'm left with the distinct impression that virtually all angels described as light beings that came from the sky and the stars in most religious doctrines are actually highly advanced aliens from other civilizations that have visited Earth. Is that correct?
Not all, but most. Extra dimensionals, extraterrestrials, beings of higher frequency, but sometimes spirit beings as well that can manifest themselves to appear as if they are physical when they may not be. So it's a variety of things, yes.
Okay. And this person's asking about Greek. ancient Greece. I'm currently being taught in universities that Hera was oppressed in relation to Zeus, and that women were not respected in ancient Greece or any other parts of the world. Um, my intuition tells me that's wrong, especially since there were like temples to Hera and things like that. So, did the ancient Greeks truly view Hera as a goddess?
Yes. The idea again represents the struggle that humanity has gone through with regard to the idea of the balancing of the male and female energies. Now, yes, you are correct. This is not true at the time for the entire planet. Different portions of the planet, different cultures on your planet have gone through things in different ways at different times with respect to the balancing of the male and female energy. But definitely there have always been portions that did respect the balance and express the balance, or at the very least did respect the feminine energy. And as you say, as you point out, erected temples to demonstrate that fact. So it's not really just as simple as everyone doing the same thing on your planet at the same time.
And are Metatron, Thoth, and Hermes the same archetype?
Thoth and Hermes are similar in vibrational energy. The idea of Metatron is something different. Metatron is more of an archetypal representation of the underlying template of reality as you experience it, more of a geometric format, more of an expression of the foundation upon which you build consciousness to create certain reality experiences.
You've spoken about Atlantis, but I heard about Mu Lemuria for the first time from your channelings recently. Can you provide us with information about them beyond the idea that they were rivals with the Atlanteans?
Well, they weren't really rivals in the sense that you might mean that today. The idea is that Atlantis was an offshoot or a colony eventually, but you have to understand that Mu existed in the Western South Pacific Ocean, and by migrating to what you now recognize as North America, were responsible for creating many of the indigenous cultures in North, Central, and South America that eventually migrated across the continent to create Atlantis as a colony that existed much, much later than Mu. While some Lemurians still existed, at the beginning of Atlantis, almost none existed by the end of Atlantis because of different changes physiologically, geologically that took place on your planet that broke up the land masses in what you now consider to be the Eastern Asian areas, South Pacific areas, creating islands and so on and so forth that used to be connected when the oceans were much lower. So the idea of Atlantis came much, much later.
And the water erosion on the Sphinx has caused some people to theorize it was built when the environment was more jungle-like.
Yes.
What did the Sphinx look like after its initial construction? And what were the features of the face? And was it painted or decorated in any way?
It was painted and decorated, and it featured the idea of Anubis. You have still representations on your planet of many different depictions of Anubis reclining, in a sense, like what you would consider a canine to be sitting on the floor, all four paws down, sitting on top of a box. The idea is that the structure was a large representation of Anubis. The representation of the chamber upon which Anubis sits are the underground chambers underneath the Sphinx.
And the resistance that at the university level of any kind of exploration of the Sphinx and the erosion and the things that indicate that it's older than they originally thought, is that correct, that it is much older than they thought?
Yes, it goes back to at least 10,500 BC, as you say. because the idea is that it was built around the same time as the Great Pyramid and certain other structures on your planet that acted for the purpose of preserving information that was destroyed in Atlantis.
Yes, which leads to this question. This person is saying that they love books and that things like species that go extinct here and libraries that have disappeared, and such as the Library of Alexandria, the Mayan libraries, all that have been destroyed. Have these been actually taken to other locations to preserve them? And if they hadn't been destroyed, what would our civilization be like now?
Some of the information, not all, has been preserved in other locations, some of which you have found and some of which you have yet to find. If the Library of Alexandria had not been destroyed, you would certainly consider Atlantis to be part of your history. That's one change that would have happened, because there was a lot of information about that culture preserved in the Library of Alexandria. Some of that information still exists in other places, some of which we have just mentioned in terms of chambers under the Sphinx. But the idea also would be that your technology would be somewhat different as well, and would be more based on the idea of vibrational resonance at this point, rather than the idea of the polluting technologies you have been using.
Are any of these libraries have material taken off planet in a sense by other ETs or anything like that to preserve them, or no?
Well, that was really not necessary, because as we have said, one of the great gifts humanity will be given when you start to really have open contact is that you will be presented with a device that will actually show you the full range of your history. So through the observations that have happened from extraterrestrial and extra-dimensional sources, it wasn't really necessary to absolutely preserve the information that existed on your planet, although some of that was done, but not that much, because the extraterrestrials already had, through their observation of you for thousands of years, already recorded all of your history and didn't really need your version of it for the most part. Some of it was preserved for, shall we say, sentimental or nostalgic reasons, but that's not because the extraterrestrials needed to preserve it. They already had all that information recorded in their own devices. And again, that will be presented to you when open contact is fully established with your planet. You will be given back your full history.
And what can you tell us about the Egyptian goddess archetypes Bastet and Sekhmet? Do they have any ET connections? And what does it mean when they keep showing up symbolically in somebody's life over and over again?
Well, Bastet in particular has to do with connections to other dimensions and understanding of knowledge that is accessed through other dimensions, through the spirit realm, but connected to the idea of the animal known as the cat on your planet, who can see interdimensionally. So when it keeps showing up synchronistically, it might be for that person a general indication, although some specifics will need to be understood about that particular person. But as a general indicator, might be an indication of the ability to go into the vibrational frequency that is similar to the idea of the animal represented by the cat on your planet, that can see spirits, that can see and make connections and communicate with spirits in the spiritual realm, in the non-physical realm. Sekhmet, we will talk about at another time.
Okay. And this is a question, a yoga question. Raja Yoga meditation practices to realize oneness with God or union of individual soul with omnipresent spirit. I know you've described these all as permission slips, but it seems to be a very comprehensive system similar to the formula. So is yoga science essentially our birthright?
Well, all things in your reality are your birthright. But the idea of yoga stretches back many thousands upon thousands of years and actually did begin in Lemurian times, in Muin times. The idea, as we have said, is that yes, everything is a permission slip, but some of them are vibrationally connected to the larger portions of the archetypal representations in your collective consciousness, and thus will work for more people than other permission slips might, that might bring a more specific energy for smaller groups or individuals. So many different kinds of permission slips are connected more directly to the collective consciousness and thus can work for many people, whereas others might be more specifically tailored to smaller groups or individuals.
And could you explain what the Merkaba is and what levels of existence it's relevant to?
The Merkaba, in a sense, is an energetic representation vibrationally of the connection between physical and non-physical reality. In a sense, it's a geometrized, symbolic version of the transition between physical and non-physical reality, which many beings have described as the so-called tunnel of light. God, Goddess, Allah, Jehovah, Tetragrammaton, the light, the I am that I am, Wakantanka. It doesn't really matter what it is that you use as a name to identify the concept of all that is. But it is important to understand that all of these names represent different archetypal expressions, different angles and different perspectives of the same one thing, so that all of your apparently separate religions, no matter how they present themselves, no matter how many symbols they use to represent the idea of God or aspects of God, are all talking about the same thing, but from different points of view that serve the uniqueness of the culture in which they live. But the idea is to understand that it all comes from source, it all is within the light. And the light, source, all that is, expresses itself in all these ways in order for there to be sufficient symbols for all the different cultural experiences on your planet, all the different individual experiences, even within a culture on your planet. As we have said, the misinterpretation of what you have called, in one particular Judeo-Christian culture, the Ten Commandments, are really the messages that were delivered in a very different way that have been misunderstood, misquoted, because of the level of understanding that existed in the culture at the time. And the so-called first commandment, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt not have false gods before me, really was a mistranslation and a misunderstanding of the idea that really would be more accurately represented as, I am that I am, and all reflections are me, therefore none can be false before me, for I am all that is. So the idea is to understand that all that is presents itself in a variety of archetypal forms, the father energy, the mother energy, God, Goddess, all that is, as you sometimes say. And these serve various functions and translate into your reality as, shall we say, smaller representations of all that is that are specifically designed to deal with specific cultural differences, specific ideology differences, specific individual interpretations and differences. Fundamentally speaking, the archetypes are all that is way of making sure that no matter what angle you approach all that is from, you will have a symbol and a representation that can serve your unique perspective. They are all true parts of all that is, because there's nothing outside of all that is. Anything you can experience as an archetypal representation, or even when you assume it is the entire representation of all that is true and accurate, because all that is everything that can possibly be. There's no outside to it. There is nothing that is not it. So it doesn't really matter how you relate, what relationship you form with the idea of any presentation of all that is, any idea or formation of the idea of God, be it the old man with the long beard, be it the idea of the Virgin Mother, be it the idea of a rock or a mountain, It matters not to all that is, because all that is all those things and more, beyond even your imagining. For all that is in its archetypal presentations also forms the symbols that are relatable to not only your particular human culture, but many cultures throughout the cosmos, throughout infinity. Anything and everything being a reflection of all that is has its own way of understanding the presentation of archetypes from source, has its own representations that make sense to their cultures. So there are an infinite variety of presentations of all that is, but it is still the same one thing fundamentally. But as you expand your consciousness and start to realize that all of these are different faces of the same thing, as many people on your planet have expressed, the 9 billion names of God are still representative of the same one thing in the holographic, multidimensional presentation that it can use to present itself. Then you start to allow those differences to sort of melt away, except for the parts you feel you need, and allow yourself to have a direct relationship, more directly, with Source, without necessarily needing it to be anything but the light. And in that light, you feel the vibration of the eternal existence that it is, the vibration you translate as the unconditional love of God. This is the vibrational frequency of existence itself. It is unconditionally supporting, unconditionally loving. And the idea is that there is no judgment in this. There is no expression of the negative in this. So even when individuals in different cultures might express or experience the idea of negative or demonic experiences, you have to understand this is still all part of God. Because there is the positive, there is the negative, and there is the neutral. These are the major archetypal energies, and they can be expressed in a variety of ways that can serve either positive or negative means. So allow yourselves to lessen the differences, in a sense, use them in whatever way serves you, use them in whatever way allows you to learn the lessons you need to learn, for the agreements that you chose to experience, the challenges that you created for yourself in this life to learn who you are and grow in various situations. Again, using the positive and negative mechanisms in a variety of ways. For ultimately, again, when you return to spirit, when you remember more of who you are, it will just be an experience. You will experience the archetypal expression of your life, which is another archetypal expression, because each and every one of you is unique, and you form your own archetypes for others to connect to draw upon, to download information from and experience from, the archetype that you are of all that is, because everyone is all that is, experiencing itself as all of the individualities that you believe yourself to be. So you are also an archetype of all that is, an archetype of God, experiencing itself in a unique way, knowing itself from a unique perspective. There will be more about this concept in a future transmission, in a way that you can more readily apply in your physical reality experience. But for now, just let it settle into you that every single thing you see, every single thing you experience, in a sense, is an archetypal presentation of all that is, the trees, the rocks, the streams, the animals, the sky, the moon, the stars, the earth itself, are all different variations and different expressions of all that is of source, of the light. And you, yourself, are also an archetype of God. We thank you for allowing us to share this concept with you this day of your time. And we ask now in return, how may we be of service to you? You may begin, if you wish, with your questions and dialogue.
Hey, Bashar. My name is Justin, and I'm up here in beautiful and rainy Salem, Oregon. It's just south of Portland. And my question is really about what you talk about in finding passion and pleasure all the time. In the middle of obviously the pandemic and building my business in the last few years, and really working hard to keep my family afloat during all of these uncertain times, I feel like a lot of my life has just become work. And even the things that I felt like I was once passionate about before, I don't feel as excited about them anymore. And so I'm having a hard time really latching onto the concept, because I feel like I'm in a weird kind of a void of a space. So any guidance that you can give on helping identify my passion and really really focusing on that would be just an amazing help. Thank you so much, Bashar, and hope you have a great day.
Well, as we say again, the idea of acting on your passion and recognizing it does not have to be an overarching project or a career. If you find that you have, or the feeling comes that you have lost your passion or lost your way, refocus simply by looking at everyday events. There are things in your life, simple things, everyday things, taking a walk, reading a book, speaking with your family, having simple, creative ways of exploring things together, that are representative of passion, as long as they contain more excitement than anything else, any other choice, then that's representative of your passion at the moment. Act on it first before any other choice. If it contains even just a little bit more attractiveness or excitement than any other choice on a simple everyday level, just act on it first, taking it as far as you can until you can take it no further. Then look for the next thing. Always make sure you're not the one dampening the excitement, but that it wanes naturally, which is the synchronistic indication that you need to look for the next thing that contains even just a little bit more attractiveness, curiosity, or excitement or passion than anything else, and act on that next. And again, it can be simple. You might just feel like, well, the most exciting thing I can do is eat a meal. The most exciting thing I can do is tell someone a story. The most exciting thing I can do is take a walk. Allow yourself to let go of the passion needing to represent itself in any particular grandiose form, and just allow yourself to act on the simple excitements that come with everyday things. That's how you begin, and then it will snowball. But again, you have to look for the times and places where you are willing to allow yourself to act on your excitements, to allow your excitement to prove to you over time that it can support you, instead of holding on to things you believe you need for support right now that aren't exciting to you. Again, as always, you don't need to let go of the things you believe you need to support you right now if they are not going to allow yourself to believe that your excitement can do the same thing. So don't let go of those things you're doing that are not exciting if you believe you need them for support. But over time, give your excitement a chance to prove to you it can also support you, by taking whatever time you can take to act on them. And the easiest way to do that is by doing the simple things. And then let it build. Let it snowball into something bigger and bigger. And let synchronicity provide you with more time in an easy way before synchronicity responds to your wish for more time in a more challenging way. Because many people, let's say they're doing a job, for example, that they are not really excited about, and they keep wishing for more time to do what excites them, and suddenly find themselves getting fired. So the idea is, now they feel adrift. But the idea is they could have been practicing their excitement in the time they had, giving the excitement time to prove that it could support you, so you can make an easier transition from what you don't prefer to what you do, rather than suddenly and abruptly finding yourself afloat, as you say, in the idea that you were holding on to something longer than you needed to, but still pushing for the idea of finding your passion. Well, something has to come to a head at some point, and if you refuse to allow for your excitement to prove it can support you over a longer period of time and an easier path for you, then you might come up against that moment where suddenly everything has to immediately change in order for you to finally get the point that you really need to start relying on your passion to replace the support that you were experiencing by doing something that isn't who you truly are.